What if Issei met naughty female Draig and got her pregnant? The autumn moon hung heavy over Kyoto's ancient temples, casting silver light across curved roofs and stone gardens that had witnessed centuries of human history. But tonight those same grounds would host something far older and more dangerous than mere human conflict. Issei Hayadu crouched behind a collapsed torii gate, his green eyes scanning the darkness with the practiced wariness of someone who'd spent the last decade surviving the supernatural underworld. At 28, he'd long since left behind the awkward, perverted teenager he'd once been. The lean muscle beneath his reinforced combat jacket spoke of countless battles, and the scars that crossed his knuckles told stories of survival against impossible odds. "Contact in 30 seconds, whispered Kibayudo through the communication device in Issei's ear. His old friend had aged just as well, still handsome, still deadly, and now serving as one of Rias Gremmery's top strategists. 3 signatures, Northwest Quadrant. Power levels are concerning. Everything's concerning these days, Issei muttered, feeling the familiar warmth of his sacred gear pulse beneath his skin. Even after all these years, Draig's presence was as constant as his own heartbeat, a deep, rumbling power that had saved his life more times than he could count. "Partner, I sense something unusual about these opponents." The dragon's voice resonated through his mind, deeper than an ocean trench, ancient as mountains. Issei had learned to trust that instinct implicitly. "Unusual how?" Issei subvocalized, not needing to speak aloud for his partner to hear. "Their essence. It tastes of the primordial chaos. These are not mere rogue gods, Issei. These are fragments of something older." A chill ran down Issei's spine that had nothing to do with the autumn night. "Kiba, update Bucho. Tell her we might need." The world exploded into chaos before he could finish. 3 figures materialized from the darkness itself, and Issei's enhanced perception caught details that would have been invisible to human eyes. They were humanoid only in the loosest sense, bodies that seemed to shift between solid matter and writhing shadow, faces that held too many eyes, mouths that opened in impossible directions. Each one radiated power that made the air itself scream. "Security," the central figure spoke, its voice like tearing metal. "We've waited eons for this moment. The boosted gear will be ours, and with it, the key to unmaking the seal." Issei was already moving, sacred gear igniting in a cascade of crimson light. The familiar weight of the gauntlet materialized on his arm, scales overlapping in perfect draconic geometry, the green jewel at its center pulsing with contained power. "Sorry, but I'm not really into sharing." He launched himself forward, fist trailing fire. Boost! The power multiplier surged through him, doubling his already considerable strength. His punch should have cratered the creature's chest. Instead, his fist passed through shadow, and tendrils of darkness wrapped around his arm like living chains. "Careful! They're using void weaving. They can phase between dimensions." Pain lanced through Issei's arm as the shadows began to squeeze, trying to crush the sacred gear itself. He grimaced, calling up more power. "Boost! Boost! Boost!" Each multiplication brought more strength, but also more strain. His body, enhanced as it was by years of training and devil transformation, still had limits. The air around him began to shimmer with heat as he pushed those limits. Explosion! The released energy vaporized the shadow chains and sent all 3 opponents flying backward. Issei landed in a crouch, breathing hard. Already he could feel the familiar burn of overdrawing his power. In his younger days he would have been unconscious by now. Experience had taught him how to manage the strain, but these things. "They're adapting to your attack patterns," Draig warned. "Each time you strike they learn." "This is bad, partner." "Yeah, I noticed." Issei watched the 3 figures reform, their movements more coordinated now. "Any bright ideas? We need to end this quickly." "Use the balance breaker, but be ready for." The creatures attacked in perfect synchronization, moving faster than before. Issei barely managed to dodge the first assault, felt the second clip his shoulder, and the third. The third one's attack was different. Instead of physical force or void energy, it drove something sharp and cold directly into his chest, not his body, but something deeper. Something fundamental. Issei gasped as alien energy flooded into his sacred gear, and Draig's roar of pain echoed through his mind like nothing he'd ever experienced before. "No! They're trying to sever our connection." Issei, you must. The world tilted sideways. Issei felt himself falling, but couldn't tell which direction was down anymore. His sacred gear blazed like a star, too bright, too hot, power cycling out of control. Through the pain and disorientation, he heard Kiba shouting something over the calm, felt magical signatures converging on his position as reinforcements arrived. But it was already too late to stop what had been set in motion. The boosted gear cracked. Not physically, the armor itself remained intact. But something deeper, something fundamental to the sacred gear's nature, shattered like glass. Issei screamed as Draig's consciousness fragmented within his soul, and in that moment of ultimate crisis, something impossible happened. The light from his sacred gear exploded outward in a column of crimson fire that reached the heavens, visible for miles. Issei felt Draig's presence tear away from him, and for one horrifying moment, he was utterly alone in his own mind for the first time in over a decade. Then the light condensed, drew inward, and took shape. Part 2, The Impossible Form. When Issei's vision cleared, he was on his back, staring up at the star-filled sky. Every muscle in his body ached, and his chest felt hollow where Draig's presence should have been. Panic began to set in. Had he lost his sacred gear entirely? Was Draig? Issei. Stay down, you idiot! That was Kaneko, her voice sharp with worry. He heard the sound of combat nearby, his friends engaging the void creatures. He tried to sit up anyway, because lying down while his team fought went against every instinct he'd developed. The world spun alarmingly, but he managed to prop himself on his elbows. That's when he saw her, standing between him and the void creatures, silhouetted against Akino's lightning and Rias's destruction magic, was a woman who absolutely should not exist. She stood perhaps 6 feet tall, with a build that suggested both feminine grace and coiled draconic power. Her skin held a faint crimson sheen, like light reflecting off ruby scales, and that impression was reinforced by scale patterns that traced along her arms, legs, and collarbone, not crude or reptilian, but elegant, decorative, beautiful. Her hair cascaded down her back in waves of deep red that seemed to contain moving fire when it caught the light, and from her temples, 2 elegant horns curved backward, the same color as old ivory touched with gold. She wore what appeared to be armor, but not like any Issei had seen before. It seemed to be made of the same material as his sacred gear, crimson scales overlapping in perfect draconic geometry, covering the essentials while leaving her arms and legs free to move. A tail, long and powerful and tipped with spade-shaped scales, lashed behind her with obvious agitation. But it was her eyes that struck him silent. They glowed with inner fire, not human eyes, not devil eyes, but pure dragon eyes. Slit-pupiled, ancient, powerful beyond measure, and completely, utterly familiar. Draig? He whispered, the name feeling inadequate even as he spoke it. She, because it was definitely a she, and wasn't that going to require some mental adjustment, turned to glance at him over her shoulder, and her expression was complex. Relief, confusion, determination, and something else he couldn't quite identify. Stay behind me, partner, she said, and her voice was Draig's, that same deep, powerful timbre he'd known for years, but filtered through a feminine register that made it something entirely new. These things threaten you, and I find that unacceptable. Then she launched herself at the void creatures with a battle cry that shook the foundations of the nearby temples. Issei watched, stunned, as his partner of 10 years fought in a way he'd never seen before. No, that wasn't quite right. He recognized the fighting style, the way she used overwhelming power and straightforward attacks. It was pure Draig, the same approach to combat they'd developed together, but seeing it executed by a physical body rather than channeled through his sacred gear was mesmerizing. She moved like liquid fire, impossibly fast and devastatingly powerful. Her fists, scaled and clawed, tore through the void creature's defenses with contemptuous ease. When one tried to phase away, she simply grabbed it between dimensions somehow, her draconic nature letting her interact with things that shouldn't be tangible. Boost! She roared, and Issei felt phantom warmth on his left arm. In response to her call, crimson symbols blazed to life along her scales, and her power doubled. Then doubled again. Boost! 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 Oh, that is deeply unfair, Kiba muttered from somewhere nearby. She can stack multipliers without a host? Dragon shot. A beam of pure draconic energy erupted from her outstretched palm, and the central void creature simply ceased to exist. The other two, apparently recognizing they'd lost whatever advantage they'd had, attempted to flee into shadow. "Oh no you don't, Draig! No, he needed a different name for her now, didn't he?" snarled. Her wings snapped open, great crimson sails that hadn't been visible before, and she was airborne in an instant. "You attacked my partner. That requires retribution." What followed was less a fight and more an execution. Within 30 seconds, all three void creatures were dispersed, their essence scattered so thoroughly that reformation would take centuries, if it was even possible. Then she landed in front of Issei, retracted her wings, and the fierce battle goddess expression melted into something much more vulnerable. "So," she said quietly, "this is awkward." Part 3. Questions without answers. The cleanup and initial damage assessment took 2 hours. Rias arrived within minutes of the battle's end, took one look at the situation, and immediately established a bounded field to keep curious humans away. The combat zone looked like a war had been fought: craters, scorched earth, one temple building partially collapsed. The Gremry team worked efficiently to repair what they could and cloud human memories of anyone who might have seen the light show. Through it all, Issei sat on a fallen log with Draig. He really needed to figure out what to call her now, sitting beside him. Neither spoke. What could you say in a situation like this? His sacred gear was gone. He'd checked multiple times, trying to summon it, but there was nothing. The power that had lived in his left arm for the past decade had simply vanished. No, not vanished. It was sitting right next to him, in a form he'd never anticipated. "Okay," Rias said finally, approaching them with Aquino at her side. The red-haired devil looked tired but composed, her usual confidence firmly in place despite the unprecedented situation. "I've reported to the higher-ups. This is going to create some complications." "That's an understatement, Bucho," Issei managed a weak smile. "My sacred gear apparently decided to become a person." "How's that going to work?" "We don't know yet," Aquino admitted, her usual playful demeanor subdued. She studied Draig, the physical dragon woman, with open fascination. "Sacred gears don't do this. They're divine constructs, bound to their hosts. The consciousness inside might be ancient and powerful, but it's not supposed to be able to manifest physically. And yet here I am," Draig said quietly. Her voice still sounded strange to Issei, familiar and foreign at once. "I can feel it. The connection to the sacred gear system is severed, perhaps permanently. Whatever those creatures did, it broke something fundamental." She held up her hand, and Issei watched as crimson scales flowed across her skin like water, forming the distinctive armor pattern of the boosted gear. "The power is still here. The abilities, the multiplication, the balance breaker potential, I have all of it. But instead of being channeled through a host, I am the host. I am the power source and the wielder simultaneously. That's..." Kiba, approaching from where he'd been helping with repairs, shook his head in amazement. "That's incredible. And terrifying. A dragon of your caliber, with full access to your abilities and a physical body? There are going to be a lot of nervous factions once word spreads." "Let them be nervous," Draig said, and there was an edge of steel in her voice. Then she looked at Issei, and that steel softened. "Partner, I'm sorry. I know this isn't what you signed up for. Your sacred gear was your power, your ace. Now it's gone and I'm..." "Stop," Issei interrupted. He'd been processing this whole situation, and while shock still dominated his emotional landscape, he'd reached a conclusion. "Draig, you've been with me through everything. Every battle, every crisis, every triumph. You've saved my life more times than I can count, and you've been the voice in my head keeping me sane when everything went to hell." He turned to face her fully. "The sacred gear was never what mattered. You were. So if you're here now, in person, then we figure it out together." Same as always. Something in her expression cracked, and her eyes, those ancient, powerful dragon eyes, glistened with what might have been tears. "Partner, though I will admit," Issei continued, trying to lighten the mood, "this is going to take some getting used to. For one thing, you're a lot more feminine than I expected." Draig actually laughed at that, a sound like distant thunder. "Yes, well, I suppose the form reflects the consciousness. Draig Gotch, the Red Dragon Emperor, has always been assumed male by humans. But dragons are more complex than your binary understanding. I am ancient Issei. I have been many things. This form simply is. She's beautiful, Aquino observed with a sly smile. Issei, your partner is gorgeous. How does that make you feel? Issei felt his face heat up, because yes, now that the initial shock was wearing off, he was very much aware that his partner of 10 years was now a stunningly attractive woman, a stunningly attractive dragon woman, who he'd shared his deepest thoughts with, who knew him better than anyone. This was going to be complicated. Can we focus on the practical concerns? He said desperately. Like, where is she going to live? What's she going to do? Does she even need to eat and sleep like a regular person? All excellent questions, Rias said. And ones we'll need to answer. But right now, we need to get you both back to the base and run some tests. We need to understand exactly what happened and what it means for both of you going forward. As they prepared to leave, Issei stood and immediately stumbled. Apparently, losing your sacred gear took more out of you than expected. Draig caught him instantly, one strong arm supporting him. Easy, partner, she said softly. I've got you. And despite everything, the confusion, the uncertainty, the massive changes that had just been forced upon his life, Issei found himself smiling. Because that was Draig, his partner, his friend. The form might have changed, but the bond remained. Though as they walked toward the transport circle Rias was preparing, with Draig's arms still supporting him, he couldn't help but wonder, what did this mean for their partnership now? How did you maintain a relationship with someone who'd lived in your soul when they suddenly had their own body? And why did a small part of him find this situation not entirely unpleasant? Part 4. New Accommodations. The Gremry Base & Co. had been Issei's home for years, and the familiar surroundings should have been comforting. Instead, everything felt strange and off-kilter as they gathered in the main strategy room for what Rias termed initial assessment. Draig stood near the window, staring out at the night sky with an expression Issei couldn't quite read. Without his sacred gear, without that constant mental connection, he couldn't just sense her mood anymore. He actually had to guess what she was thinking, like with any other person. It was incredibly disorienting. The medical scans are inconclusive, Asia Argento reported, reviewing data on a tablet. The gentle healer had grown into a skilled medical specialist over the years, and her expertise with supernatural physiology was invaluable. Physically, she reads as a pure dragon. Ancient class, primordial bloodline, power levels that are frankly terrifying. But there's something else. The sacred gear signature, Rias supplied. It's still there, but integrated into her very being. She's not just a dragon who was once part of a sacred gear, she is a living sacred gear now. Which means what, exactly? Issei asked. We don't know, Aquino admitted. This is unprecedented. There are no protocols, no historical records, nothing to guide us. The best we can do is observe and adapt. Wonderful, Draig muttered from the window. I'm a walking anomaly. You were always an anomaly, Issei said before he could stop himself. Being one of the two heavenly dragons kind of guarantees that. She turned to look at him, and a small smile touched her lips. Fair point, partner. The immediate concern, Rias continued, is living arrangements. Draig, you obviously can't return to the sacred gear system. You need somewhere to stay, and it needs to be somewhere secure. There will be factions that want to study you, recruit you, or worse. She can stay with me, Issei said immediately. Everyone turned to look at him. What? He felt defensive. I've got a 2-bedroom apartment. The second room is just storage anyway. She's my partner, was my partner, is still my partner? This is confusing. Point is, we've been together for 10 years. I'm not abandoning her now. Issei, Kaneko said flatly, you realize you're suggesting living with a woman who knows literally everything about you. Every embarrassing thought, every midnight fantasy, every... Thank you, Kaneko, I'm aware, Issei interrupted, his face burning. He looked at Draig. Unless you'd rather not? I don't want to assume. No, Draig said quickly. I mean, yes. I'd like that. If you're sure. She looked uncertain, vulnerable in a way he'd never associated with the mighty Red Dragon Emperor. This is all very new. Having physical needs, spatial requirements, existing as a separate entity. The idea of being alone right now is uncomfortable. Then it's settled, Rias decided. Though we'll need to establish protocols. Security measures, regular check-ins, monitoring for any changes in your condition. The meeting continued, covering logistics and contingency plans, but Issei found his attention drifting. He kept looking at Draig, trying to reconcile this physical woman with the presence that had lived in his head for so long. She caught him staring once, and raised an eyebrow in silent question. He looked away quickly. This was going to be an adjustment for both of them. By the time they arrived at Issei's apartment, it was past midnight. Issei unlocked the door, suddenly very aware of how modest his living space was. He never needed to impress anyone with his accommodations before. It's not much, he said, flipping on lights. But it's home. Draig stepped inside, her tail swishing behind her with what he was beginning to recognize as curiosity. You've lived here for 3 years, and I experienced it all through your senses. But seeing it directly is different. She moved through the space, touching things gently, the back of the couch, the kitchen counter, a framed photo of the old occult research club. Everything seems more real. More solid. Yeah, well, welcome to having a body, Issei said. Then he froze. Wait, do you know how to work a body? Like all the basics? Do I need to explain things? Draig's laugh was warm. I have millennia of memories, partner. I've observed countless hosts, experienced physical existence through them. I know how bodies work. She paused, though I'll admit, experiencing it firsthand is different from observing. I've never been hungry before, but right now I am, and it's a very strange sensation. Right, food. I can do food. Issei headed for the kitchen. Though fair warning, I'm not Asia. My cooking is functional at best. As he rummaged through the refrigerator, Draig explored further. He heard her open the door to what would be her room, heard her soft exclamation. Partner, this room is full of boxes. Yeah, I'll clear it out tomorrow. Tonight you can take my bed, I'll use the couch. Absolutely not. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed. If anyone takes the couch, it's me. This is your home. You're my guest. I'm your partner, she interrupted firmly. And partners don't displace each other. We'll clear the room tonight together. I'm a dragon. I don't need as much sleep as humans anyway, so that's what they did. For the next 2 hours, they sorted through boxes of old mission reports, outdated equipment, and accumulated junk that Issei had been meaning to deal with for months. It was oddly domestic, comfortable even. They fell into an easy rhythm, and Issei found himself relaxing for the first time since the battle. Do you remember the first time we met? Draig asked as she lifted a particularly heavy box with casual ease. How could I forget? You woke up in my soul and nearly gave me a heart attack. You were a scared teenager who'd just been killed by a fallen angel and reincarnated as a devil. I thought you'd faint when I first spoke. I almost did, Issei admitted with a laugh. You were this ancient, powerful voice in my head, and I was just me. I still don't know why I got chosen for the boosted gear. Because you have the soul of a warrior, Draig said seriously. Raw, untrained, but strong where it mattered. And you never gave up. Every time you were knocked down, you got back up. That's why I chose you, Issei. Not because you were special, but because you refused to stay ordinary. The words hit him harder than he expected. You chose me? I thought sacred gears were assigned by God's system. The system makes matches, but the consciousness within can accept or reject. I've rejected dozens of potential hosts. But you? She smiled. You were interesting. And you've never disappointed me, partner. By the time they finished, the room was actually livable. Bare, but clean. Issei dug out spare sheets and helped Draig make the bed, and the whole time he was intensely aware that this was real. His partner had a body now. Would sleep in the next room. Would exist in his life in an entirely new way. Well, he said awkwardly as they finished, I guess this is good night then. If you need anything, Issei. Draig's hand caught his arm gently. Thank you? For not rejecting me. For not seeing this as a burden. I know having me here, in person, changes everything. It does, he agreed. But maybe not in a bad way. I don't know yet. This is all very new. But Draig, you're still my partner. That hasn't changed. She pulled him into a hug, and Issei froze for a moment before returning it. She was warm, really warm, like a furnace, and solid in a way that his previous mental connection with her had never conveyed. He could feel the faint texture of scales where they traced her arms, feel the slow, powerful beat of her heart. "Good night, partner," she whispered. "Good night, Draig." As he lay on the couch later, staring at the ceiling and utterly failing to sleep, Issei's mind raced. His life had just been completely upended. His sacred gear was gone. His partner was now a person. Everything he'd built his career and identity around had fundamentally changed. And yet, when he thought about Draig in the next room, when he remembered that hug, when he considered the possibilities this new situation offered, he couldn't quite make himself regret it. From the other room, he heard soft movement, and then Draig's voice, quiet but carrying easily in the silent apartment. "Partner? Are you still awake?" "Yeah," he called back. "Can't sleep." "Neither can I. Physical exhaustion is one thing, but my mind won't quiet. Too many questions about what happens next." "Same here," Issei admitted. Silence for a moment, then, "Want to talk about it." And Issei smiled, because that was so perfectly Draig, practical, direct, trying to solve problems by facing them head-on. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I think I do." They talked until dawn, two partners trying to figure out their new reality, and if the conversation sometimes drifted into topics that had nothing to do with their situation, favorite foods, opinions on movies, debates about combat strategy, well, maybe that was exactly what they both needed. The world outside might be confused about what they'd become. Political factions would scheme, allies would question, enemies would plot. But in that small apartment, as the sun began to rise over Ko, two people who'd once shared a soul began learning how to share a life instead. And that, Issei thought as exhaustion finally began to claim him, might be the start of something extraordinary. Issei woke to the smell of burning. He jerked upright on the couch, momentarily disoriented, before memory crashed back. The battle, Draig's transformation, their late-night conversation. Smoke was definitely coming from the kitchen, accompanied by some very creative cursing in what sounded like ancient Welsh. He stumbled into the kitchen to find Draig staring at a frying pan with an expression of profound betrayal. The eggs inside were, well, calling them scrambled would be generous. They looked more like charcoal nuggets swimming in a pool of burned oil. "It looked so simple when you did it through my observations," she said without looking up. "Heat plus eggs equals breakfast. Why is it not working?" Issei couldn't help it. He laughed. Here was one of the most powerful beings in existence, a dragon who'd fought gods and shaped history, defeated by breakfast. "Observation and execution are different skills," he said, moving to turn off the stove before she set off the fire alarm. "Here, let me show you. Actually show you, not just let you watch through my senses." What followed was perhaps the most surreal cooking lesson in history. Issei stood behind Draig, guiding her hands through the motions of properly scrambling eggs. She was a surprisingly quick study once she got past her initial frustration. Though her strength control needed work, she'd cracked the first 3 eggs so hard they'd exploded. "Gentle," Issei instructed, his hands over hers. "You're not fighting them, you're just opening them." "Yes, I understand the concept." But her tone was amused rather than irritated. "My apologies, partner. Millennia of existence did not prepare me for the fragility of chicken eggs." By the time they sat down to eat, successfully scrambled eggs, slightly burned toast, and coffee that Draig declared oddly addictive, Issei's phone had already accumulated 15 missed calls and 43 messages. "Looks like word is spreading," he muttered, scrolling through increasingly frantic texts from various contacts. "The Gramry clan wants a formal meeting. The church has questions. Even Vala sent something, and he never contacts me first." Draig's expression darkened at the mention of Issei's rival. The White Dragon. "He'll see this as an opportunity." Probably, Issei agreed. "But that's a problem for later. Right now, we need to figure out the basics. Like, do you have any identification? Legal documents? Can you even exist in human society?" "I'm a dragon who materialized yesterday from a sacred gear. So no, and technically no." She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "Though I suppose we'll need to create a cover identity." The supernatural world might accept my existence, but we still live among humans. Rias can probably help with that. The Gremery family has connections. Issei paused. We should also figure out your capabilities. What can you do now that you're physical? Can you still boost? Use balance breaker? What about your full dragon form? Draig's tail swished with interest. Good questions. Should we test them? Absolutely not in my apartment, Issei said quickly. We'll use the training grounds at the base. After we deal with the incoming political storm. As if summoned by his words, there was a knock at the door. A very specific pattern of knocks that made Issei groan. That's Rias's we need to talk seriously knock, he muttered. Guess our grace period is over. When he opened the door, it wasn't just Rias. Akino, Kaneko, Kiba, and Asia all crowded into his small apartment, along with someone unexpected, Azazel, the Governor-General of the Fallen Angels and Issei's occasional mentor. Well, Azazel said, his golden eyes immediately finding Draig. When I heard the reports, I thought someone was exaggerating. But here you are, the great Red Dragon Emperor, in the flesh. Literally, he grinned. This is the most interesting thing to happen in decades. Azazel-sensei, Issei said warily. Why do I get the feeling this isn't a social call? Because you're not an idiot, despite what your school grades suggested. Azazel invited himself in, the others following. We've got a situation. Multiple situations, actually. Turns out when a Longinus-class sacred gear suddenly becomes a free agent, everyone with even a passing interest in power balance gets nervous. Part 2, Political Complications. They gathered in Issei's living room, which was definitely not designed for this many people. Kaneko claimed the armchair, Kiba leaned against the wall, and the others distributed themselves around the couch. Draig remained standing near the window, her posture carefully neutral. Let's start with the basics, Rias began, slipping into her role as clan heiress with practiced ease. In the last 12 hours, we've received formal inquiries from the Gremery clan, the Church, the Fallen Angel faction, the Norse Pantheon, and 3 different dragon factions. Everyone wants to know what Draig's status is. My status is not interested in being anyone's weapon, Draig said flatly. Which is what we've been telling them, Akino assured her. But it's complicated. See, sacred gears are part of a divine system. They have rules, hierarchies, purposes. You've essentially broken free of that system, which raises questions about whether others could do the same. In other words, Azazel continued, you're a walking example that the supposedly unbreakable rules can be broken. That makes certain parties very nervous. Issei felt a protective surge. If anyone thinks they're going to experiment on her or force her into anything, peace, partner, Draig interrupted, though she looked touched by his reaction. They can try. They won't succeed. The issue isn't whether they can force you, Kiba said quietly. It's what happens when they try and fail. We're talking about potential political incidents, faction conflicts, maybe even war. There's also the matter of Issei, Asia added gently. Without his sacred gear, his status in the devil hierarchy becomes uncertain. Many of his titles and positions were based on being the Sekiryudai. Issei hadn't thought of that. His stomach sank. So what, I'm demoted? Not necessarily, Rias said quickly. You're still a mid-class devil with an impressive service record. But there will be questions about your future role, especially in combat operations. The room fell silent. Issei had built his entire adult life around being the Red Dragon Emperor. Without the boosted gear, who was he? Just another devil, and not even a particularly old or powerful one. This is my fault, Draig said quietly. If I could return to the sacred gear, I would. But I've tried. The connection is completely severed. Don't, Issei said firmly. Don't apologize for existing. We'll figure this out. Actually, Azazel said, leaning forward with sudden intensity, there might be a solution to several problems at once. It's crazy, probably unprecedented, and definitely risky, but hear me out. Everyone turned to look at him. Draig, you still have all your dragon powers, plus the sacred gear abilities, right? You can boost, multiply power, theoretically use balance breaker? In theory, Draig confirmed. I haven't tested the limits yet. And Issei, you spent 10 years synchronizing with those abilities. Your body is adapted to handle boosted power, Your combat style is built around it. Your reflexes are trained for it. Your point? Issei asked. Azazel's grin widened. What if you bonded again? Not as sacred gear and host, but as partners. True partners. Draig could channel her power to you in combat. You could coordinate like you used to, but without the master-servant dynamic of the sacred gear system. That's... Kiba looked stunned. That's actually brilliant. A combat partnership between equals. It's also completely untested, Kaneko pointed out. How would the power transfer even work? Dragons have bonding rituals, Azazel said. Ancient magic, older than the sacred gear system. If Draig chose to bond with Issei as her partner, not her host, her true partner, they could share power through that connection. Draig's tail had gone very still. You're talking about a draconic life bond. Those are serious. Permanent. What does that mean exactly? Asia asked. It means binding our life forces together, Draig explained slowly. Our souls would be linked, not merged like before, but connected. We'd share strength, potentially share lifespan, be able to sense each other across any distance. And it cannot be broken, short of death. The weight of that statement settled over the room. That seems extreme, Rias said carefully. Surely there are less binding alternatives? There might be, Azazel admitted. But none as effective. And none that would send as clear a message to the factions sniffing around. A life-bonded pair is sacred to dragon culture. Anyone trying to separate them or control one to get to the other would earn the enmity of every dragon in existence. So it's protection too, Aquino mused. Political armor. But it's still asking them to bind their entire existences together, Asia protested. Forever. That's not a decision to make lightly. All eyes turned to Issei and Draig. They looked at each other across the room, and Issei wondered what she was thinking. A life bond. Permanent connection. It should have terrified him. It was a bigger commitment than marriage, more final than any contract. But when he really examined his feelings, terror wasn't what he found. Can we think about it? He asked finally. Of course, Rias said. This is your decision, both of you. Take the time you need, though don't take too long, Azazel added. The political pressure is only going to increase. Right now everyone's still gathering information. Soon they'll start making moves. The meeting continued for another hour, covering practical matters, security protocols, communication procedures, training schedules. But Issei's mind kept circling back to the idea of the life bond. Finally, as everyone prepared to leave, Kaneko pulled him aside. You're going to do it, she said flatly. It wasn't a question. I don't know yet. Yes, you do. I can see it on your face. You've already decided, Issei sighed. Is it that obvious? Only to people who know you. Her expression softened slightly. Just make sure it's what you both want. Not what's politically convenient or tactically smart. What you actually want. After everyone left, Issei found Draig on the apartment's small balcony, staring out over the city. The afternoon sun caught her scales, making them shimmer like rubies. Quite a day, he said, joining her. Indeed. She didn't look at him. Partner, about this life bond. You don't have to. Do you want to? He interrupted. That made her turn. What? Do you want to bond with me? Forget the politics, forget the tactical advantages. If it was just about us, would you want that connection? Draig was quiet for a long moment. I've been with you for 10 years, she said finally. I've seen your best moments and your worst. I've felt your triumphs and your despairs. I know you better than any being in existence, and you know me the same way. She smiled slightly. The bond would just make official what already exists. So that's a yes? That's I would be honored, she corrected. But Issei, you need to understand what you'd be giving up. A life bond with a dragon means your lifespan extends to match mine. You'd live for thousands of years, watching human friends age and die. Your life would no longer be entirely your own. Sounds like you're trying to talk me out of it. I'm making sure you understand the cost. Issei leaned on the balcony railing, considering. You know what I think? I think I've already paid that cost. The moment I became a devil, I committed to an extended lifespan. The moment I bonded with the boosted gear, my life stopped being normal. I've been walking this path for 10 years, Draig. Formalizing it doesn't scare me. He turned to face her fully. What scares me is the idea of you being alone. Of you having to navigate this new existence without support. We've been partners for a decade. I'm not about to stop now just because the format changed. You're certain? I am if you are. Draig's expression shifted through several emotions before settling on something warm and determined. Then yes, partner. Let's make it official. They stood there on the balcony as the sun set over Ko. Two beings who'd shared a soul preparing to share a life, and somehow it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Part 3. The Bonding Ritual. 3 days later, they gathered in a sacred grove deep in the mountains, a place where ley lines converged and ancient magic still flowed strong. The bonding ritual, Azazel had explained, needed to be conducted in a place of power, witnessed by representatives of the major factions to ensure legitimacy. Issei stood in the center of a ritual circle drawn in silver and gold, wearing ceremonial robes that felt entirely too formal. Around the grove's perimeter, observers had gathered, Rias and her peerage, representatives from the fallen angels, a church delegation, and several dragons in human form who'd come specifically to witness one of their own perform the ancient rite. And across from him, also robed in ceremonial attire, stood Draig. The crimson fabric complemented her scales, and someone had woven gold thread through her hair. She looked simultaneously regal and nervous. Last chance to back out, she whispered as the officiating dragon, an ancient WIRM named Tiamat, began preparing the ritual. Not happening, Issei whispered back. Tiamat, in her human form of an elderly woman with scales across her cheekbones, raised her hands. The air itself seemed to thicken with power. We gathered to witness a life bond, she intoned, her voice carrying to every corner of the grove. An ancient rite, a sacred connection. Issei Hayadu, do you come to this bond freely? I do, Issei said clearly. Draig Y Gotch, Red Dragon Emperor, do you come to this bond freely? I do, Draig replied, her voice steady. Then let the ritual begin. What followed was complex and beautiful. Tiamat guided them through ancient words in a language that predated human civilization, drawing power from the ley lines and weaving it into intricate patterns around them. Issei felt magic sink into his skin like warm rain, felt his devil nature and something older, something draconic, rise up to meet it. Place your hands together, Tiamat instructed. Issei and Draig clasped hands, and the moment they touched, power surged between them. Red light blazed from where their skin met, spreading up their arms in geometric patterns that looked like circuit boards made of fire. Speak your oath, Issei Hayadu. Issei took a breath. They'd been told to speak from the heart, to let the magic shape their words into binding promises. I swear to stand with you, Draig. In battle and in peace, in triumph and in struggle. Your victories are mine, your burdens are mine. Where you go, I will follow. What you face, we will face together. I bind my life to yours, freely given, gladly sworn. The patterns of light on his arms burned brighter. Speak your oath, Draig Y Gotch. Draig's voice was thick with emotion. I swear to stand with you, Issei. To share my strength when you falter, to lend my power when you fight. Your dreams are my dreams, your struggles are my struggles. Where you lead, I will support. What you build, I will protect. I bind my life to yours, freely given, gladly sworn. The light exploded outward in a crimson wave that washed over the entire grove. Issei gasped as he felt something fundamental shift inside him, a door opening, a connection forming. Suddenly he could feel Draig in a way that had nothing to do with their old sacred gear link. This was deeper, more intimate. He could sense her heartbeat, her emotions, the vast pool of power that was her draconic essence, and she could sense him the same way. He felt her wonder, her joy, her absolute certainty that this was right. The bond is formed, Tiamat declared, and now there was warmth in her ancient voice. Two souls, one destiny. What is bound here cannot be unbound. May your partnership bring strength to both, and may you walk the long years ahead together. The ritual circle flared one final time, then faded. The patterns on their arms remained, delicate traceries of red and gold that marked them as bonded. It is done, Tiamat said simply. There should have been applause, or formal acknowledgments, but everyone in the grove seemed too stunned by the sheer power of what they'd witnessed. The air still crackled with residual magic. Then Rias stepped forward, smiling. Congratulations, both of you. That broke the spell. Suddenly everyone was moving, offering congratulations, asking questions. But Issei barely heard them. He was too focused on the incredible sensation of the bond, this new connection that was somehow both familiar and completely novel. Partner, Draig's voice in his mind, but different now, not the one-way communication of before, but a true mental link. How do you feel? Amazing, he thought back. You, complete, she answered. For the first time since manifesting, I feel complete. Part 4, New Dynamics. The celebration that followed was subdued but genuine. Representatives from various factions offered formal recognition of the bond, which came with certain political protections. As Azazel had predicted, the dragon factions in particular made it clear that any attempt to separate or harm a bonded pair would be considered an act of war. By the time they returned to the apartment that night, Issei was exhausted. But it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came after something momentous and positive. Well, he said, collapsing on the couch, we're officially bonded. How does it feel? Draig settled into the armchair, her tail draped over the armrest. Strange. Wonderful. A bit overwhelming. I can feel you, your emotions, your physical state. You're tired but happy. Your left knee aches slightly from standing in the ritual circle. And you're hungry but too lazy to do anything about it. That's incredibly accurate and slightly terrifying, Issei admitted. Can you dial it back? Or is this always going to be this intense? We'll learn to control it, Draig assured him. Right now everything's fresh and raw. Give it time. She paused. Though I have to say, being on this side of the link is enlightening. Is this how you experienced me all those years? This constant presence? Pretty much, yeah. Though I could block you out when I needed privacy. Good to know that's possible, she said with amusement. I'd hate to intrude on certain activities. Issei's face heated. Let's establish some boundaries right now. Private thoughts stay private unless we explicitly share them, agreed. But she was grinning. Though partner, I already know all your embarrassing secrets. 10 years of mental connection, remember? Don't remind me, he groaned. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Issei marveled at how natural this felt. The bond hummed between them like a living thing, but it wasn't intrusive. It was more like awareness of his own heartbeat, always there, but only noticeable when he paid attention. We should test the combat applications tomorrow, Draig said eventually. See if we can replicate the boost function through the bond. Good idea. Though I'm betting it'll work. I can already feel your power. It's like standing next to a furnace. All that energy just waiting to be tapped. That's exactly what it is. She stood, stretching. But for now, I think we should rest. The ritual took more out of us than I expected. As she headed to her room, Issei called out, Draig? She paused in the doorway. Thank you? For choosing this. For choosing me. Her smile was soft and genuine. Always, partner. In any form, in any life. Always. After she left, Issei remained on the couch, staring at the ceiling. The bond pulsed gently. A constant reminder that he was no longer alone in quite the same way. It should have felt claustrophobic, having someone literally connected to his soul. Instead, it felt like coming home. Through the bond, he felt Draig's contentment as she settled into bed, felt her consciousness begin to drift toward sleep. And beneath that, something else, a deep, abiding affection that made his chest tight. Sleep well, partner, he projected, testing the mental link. You too, Issei, came her drowsy reply. Tomorrow we begin figuring out what we've become. Issei smiled in the darkness. What they'd become was something unprecedented. A human-turned-devil bonded to a dragon-turned-person, united by magic older than civilization itself. The political implications would be complicated. The practical applications would need extensive testing. The long-term consequences were impossible to predict. But lying there in the quiet apartment, feeling Draig's presence warm and constant through their bond, Issei found he wasn't worried. They'd figured out everything else together. This would be no different. And maybe, just maybe, this new partnership would become something even greater than what they'd had before. The thought followed him into sleep, and if his dreams were filled with crimson scales and golden eyes, well, that was just the bond settling into place. Their new life together had officially begun. The training ground beneath the Gremory estate was designed to withstand the destructive output of high-class devils and above, reinforced barriers, self-repairing surfaces, and enough magical dampening to prevent the destruction from leaking into the mortal world above. It was one of the few places where Issei and Draig could truly cut loose. "All right," Ria said from the observation deck, her voice carrying through magical speakers. "Start with basic power transfer. Draig, try channeling a single boost to Issei through the bond." It had been 4 days since the bonding ritual, and while they'd grown accustomed to the constant awareness of each other, they hadn't yet tested the combat applications. Issei stood in the center of the arena, settling into a fighting stance that felt uncomfortably empty without his sacred gear materializing on his arm. Draig stood 20 feet away, eyes closed in concentration. Through the bond, Issei felt her gathering power, that vast, draconic reservoir that had once been his to draw on. "Ready, partner?" her mental voice asked. "Let's find out what we can do." Red light blazed around Draig's form, and she spoke the word that had defined Issei's combat style for a decade: boost. Power slammed into Issei through the bond like a freight train. He gasped, stumbling as energy flooded his system, familiar and foreign all at once. It was the boost he remembered, the doubling of power that had carried him through countless battles, but filtered through their new connection it felt different. Rawer. More intense. "How do you feel?" Kiba called from the observation deck. "Like I stuck my finger in a socket," Issei managed. "But in a good way?" "The power's there, I can feel it, but the delivery method is unrefined," Draig finished, opening her eyes. "The sacred gear used to regulate the power transfer, step it down to what your body could handle. Now I'm channeling directly. We need to find the right balance." "Try again," Aquino suggested. "But Draig, modulate your output. Think of it like a dimmer switch rather than an on-off button." They tried again. And again. Over the next hour, they experimented with different methods of power transfer, finding the rhythm that worked for them. It was frustrating. What had once been automatic now required conscious effort and coordination. But slowly, gradually, they found their groove. "Boost!" Draig called, and this time the power flowed smoothly through the bond. Issei felt his physical capabilities double, the enhancement spreading through muscle and bone with familiar warmth. "That's it!" he shouted. Again. "Boost!" Another doubling. Issei's perception sharpened, time seeming to slow as his enhanced nervous system processed information faster. "Boost!" 8 times normal strength now. He could feel the strain building, but it was manageable. "Boost!" 16 times. His skin began to glow with crimson energy, power leaking out in visible manifestations. "Okay, that's probably enough for now," Rias cautioned. "Issei, try some combat maneuvers." What followed was a demonstration that had everyone in the observation deck leaning forward with interest. Issei moved through combat forms with enhanced speed and power, his strikes leaving craters in the reinforced floor. Without his sacred gear armor, he was more vulnerable than before, but the raw power was still there, channeled through the bond. "Fascinating," Azazel muttered, scribbling notes. "The efficiency is actually better than the sacred gear system. No energy lost to maintaining the physical construct, all of it going directly to enhancement." "But he's unarmored," Kaneko pointed out. "One good hit and he's done." "Not necessarily," Draig said. She raised her hand, and crimson scales began flowing across her skin, forming the distinctive pattern of the boosted gear's armor. "I can still manifest this," and through the bond. She concentrated, and Issei gasped as he felt phantom weight on his left arm. He looked down to see his own skin shimmering, scales beginning to form and mirror to Draig's armor. "Incredible," Asia breathed. "She's sharing the armor through the bond." "Trying to," Draig said through gritted teeth. The scales on Issei's arm flickered and faded. "It's harder than I thought. The armor wants to manifest on me, not him." "Because you're the source now," Azazel said. "The sacred gear is part of your essential nature. Projecting it onto Issei fights against that fundamental identity." They worked on it for another hour, but couldn't quite crack the armor-sharing problem. By the time they called it quits, both Issei and Draig were exhausted, physically for Issei, mentally for Draig. "Good progress though," Rias said as they toweled off. "You're already operating at mid-class devil combat effectiveness, and that's just with basic boosts. Once you master the more advanced techniques, if we can master them, Draig interrupted. Without the sacred gear as an interface, some abilities might be impossible. We'll figure it out, Issei said firmly. Through the bond, he sent reassurance, and felt her gratitude in return. As they headed to the showers, Kiba fell into step beside Issei. You two are adapting remarkably well. The bond seems stable. It is, Issei agreed. Honestly, it feels more natural than I expected. Less invasive than when she was in my head. Because now you're equals, Kiba observed. Before, she was powerful but trapped. Dependent on you for physical existence. Now she has her own agency, her own body. The dynamic is healthier. Issei hadn't thought of it that way, but Kiba was right. The old sacred gear relationship had been inherently unbalanced. Draig powerful but constrained, Issei weak but free. Now they were partners in truth, each bringing different strengths to the table. I heard that, Draig's mental voice came through the bond, amused. And for what it's worth, Kiba is correct. I prefer this arrangement. Yeah? Issei projected back. Even though it means starting from scratch on combat coordination? Even then. I'd rather struggle as a free being than excel as a prisoner, however gilded that cage might be. Fair enough. Part 2, Ancient Laws Surface. The summons came 2 weeks after the bonding ritual, delivered by a dragon in full regalia who appeared in the middle of their training session with no warning. Draig y Gotch, the dragon intoned, his form shimmering between human and draconic. The Council of Ancients requests your presence. The matter of your transformation and bonding must be formally addressed. Draig's expression went carefully neutral, but through the bond Issei felt her spike of anxiety. When? 3 days hence, at the Crimson Summit. You may bring your bonded partner, as is tradition. After the messenger left, Draig was uncharacteristically quiet. What's the Council of Ancients? Issei asked, though he suspected he wasn't going to like the answer. The oldest and most powerful dragons still in existence, Draig explained. They set policy for dragonkind, mediate disputes, and enforce ancient laws. They're also incredibly conservative, and not particularly fond of change. And you manifesting physically is definitely a change. That's putting it mildly. She began pacing, her tail lashing with agitation. The fact that they waited this long to summon me is actually ominous. It means they've been deliberating, consulting precedents, building a case. A case for what? Draig stopped pacing and met his eyes. For whether my existence violates fundamental dragon law. For whether the bonding ritual was legitimate. For whether I should be allowed to continue existing in this form. Ice flooded Issei's veins. They can't. They can, Draig said quietly. The Council has authority over all dragons. If they declare my existence unlawful, they can try to force me back into formlessness. Or worse, let them try, Issei growled. I'd like to see them get through our entire faction. It won't come to that, Draig said, but she didn't sound entirely convinced. Probably. The bonding ritual was witnessed and legitimate. That gives us some protection, but I need to prepare my case, demonstrate that I'm still bound by dragon law despite my irregular circumstances. Over the next 3 days they prepared. Azazel helped Draig research precedents, while Rias ensured they'd have political backing if needed. Asia prepared medical documentation of Draig's physical form. Even Vala sent a message, brief and cryptic, but suggesting the White Dragon faction would support their case if required. The night before they were scheduled to appear before the council, Issei found Draig on their apartment balcony again, staring at the stars. Can't sleep? He asked, joining her. Too much running through my mind. She glanced at him. I'm sorry, partner. You signed up for a bonding with all its benefits and protections. You didn't sign up for dragon politics. Actually, I'm pretty sure I did. The whole one destiny thing kind of implies we share both the good and the bad. That earned him a small smile. Fair point. They stood in comfortable silence, and through the bond Issei felt the complex tangle of her emotions, anxiety, determination, and beneath it all, a fierce protective instinct toward him. She was worried not just about her own fate, but about what would happen to him if the council ruled against her. Stop that, he projected. Whatever happens, we face it together. That's what the bond means. I know. But Issei, If they force me back into formlessness, the bond might break. Or worse, it might drag you with me. You could lose your physical existence too. That was new information. Azazel didn't mention that possibility, because I didn't tell him. It's theoretical, based on ancient bonding lore. But if our souls are truly linked and one becomes formless. She trailed off. Issei considered this. He should probably be terrified. Instead, he felt oddly calm. Then we make sure they don't force you back, he said simply. We present our case, we show them you're still honoring dragon law, and we make them understand that what you've become is evolution, not violation. Just like that, just like that. Draig turned to fully face him, her dragon eyes searching his expression. How are you so calm about this? Because I trust you, Issei said. And I trust us. We've faced worse odds before. Not quite like this. No, he admitted. But Draig, you're one of the two heavenly dragons. You've existed for millennia, fought gods, shaped history. A council of old dragons might be intimidating, but they're not insurmountable. She laughed softly. When did you become the confident one in this partnership? About 10 years ago, when a certain dragon decided I was worth investing in. Through the bond, he felt her emotional response to that. Warmth, affection, pride, and something else. Something deeper that neither of them had quite put words to yet. We should sleep, she said finally. Tomorrow is going to be challenging. But she didn't move toward the door. Neither did Issei. They stood together under the stars, connected by magic and choice, and if they stood a little closer than strictly necessary, either mentioned it. Part 3. The Crimson Summit. The Crimson Summit was located in a pocket dimension, accessible only to dragons and those they explicitly invited. Issei and Draig stepped through the portal together, emerging into a space that defied mortal geometry. A vast chamber that seemed to curve upward into infinity, walls of crystallized flame, and a floor that looked like solidified starlight. Waiting for them were the Council of Ancients. 7 dragons in various forms, some humanoid, some partially shifted, one in full draconic glory that made the chamber feel small despite its impossible size. Their combined age probably exceeded human civilization by several orders of magnitude, and the power radiating from them made Issei's instincts scream danger. Draig Wygotch, the central figure, spoke. An ancient WYRM in humanoid form, scales the color of old bronze, eyes like molten gold. You stand before the council to answer for your transformation. I am here as summoned, Elder Vritra, Draig said formally, her voice steady despite the anxiety Issei felt through the bond. You understand the gravity of what you've done? Another council member asked. This one appeared as a woman made of living shadow. In all the eons since the sacred gear system was created, no consciousness has ever successfully manifested physically from within one. You've broken rules written by the divine. I didn't choose this transformation, Draig said carefully. It was forced upon me by external attack. The void creatures severed my connection to the sacred gear system. Manifesting physically was survival, not rebellion. And yet you've chosen to remain physical, Vritra observed. You could have sought to return to the system. Instead, you bonded with your former host, making your separation permanent. I made the choice that preserved my existence and honored my partnership, Draig replied. Is survival now a violation of dragon law? Don't be flippant, the shadow dragon snapped. This isn't about survival. This is about precedent. If other sacred gear consciousnesses learn they can manifest physically, the entire divine system could collapse. An exaggeration, Draig countered. My circumstances were unique. The void attack specifically targeted the sacred gear's fundamental structure. Replicating those conditions would require resources and knowledge that few possess. Nevertheless, a third council member spoke. This one a dragon whose scales shifted through every color of the spectrum. Your existence poses questions. The bonding ritual you underwent, for instance. Life bonds are sacred to our kind, reserved for true dragons. You are something else now. A hybrid of dragon and divine construct. Does dragon law even apply to you? That was clearly the crux of the matter. If Draig wasn't legally considered a dragon anymore, she lost the protections dragon law provided. But if she was still a dragon, then her use of dragon bonding rituals was legitimate. May I speak? Issei asked, stepping forward. The council's attention focused on him like a physical weight. Vritra's golden eyes studied him with uncomfortable intensity. The human host, Vritra said. Or rather, the former host, now bonded partner. Speak. Issei swallowed his nervousness. With respect, elders, you're asking the wrong question. It doesn't matter if Draig fits neatly into your categories. What matters is whether she honors the principles dragon law is meant to protect. And what would a reincarnated devil know of dragon principles? The shadow dragon asked dismissively. More than you'd think, considering I carried a dragon's soul for 10 years, Issei shot back. Dragon law is about strength, honor, and keeping your word. Draig has demonstrated all three. She's one of the most powerful beings in existence. She's honored every agreement she's ever made. And when she gave me her oath in the bonding ritual, she meant every word. Pretty speech, the color-shifting dragon said. But it doesn't address the fundamental issue. She's a sacred gear consciousness in physical form. That shouldn't be possible. And yet it is, Draig said quietly. I exist. I am here, before you, real and present. You can deny the categories that define me, but you cannot deny my existence itself. A long silence fell over the chamber. The council members exchanged looks, or whatever passed for communication among ancient dragons. Finally, Vritra spoke again. There is another concern. Your power. As a sacred gear, your abilities were constrained by your host's capacity and the gear's structure. Now those constraints are removed. How do we know you won't become a threat? You have my word, Draig said simply. The same word I gave millennia ago when I agreed to the sacred gear binding. I will not use my power to upset the balance. I will honor the agreements between dragons and the other factions. And I will act with the restraint expected of one of my age and experience. Words, the shadow dragon muttered. We need more than words. Then observe her, Issei suggested. The bond means you can always find us. Set conditions, establish check-ins, whatever makes the council comfortable. But don't force her back into formlessness just because she doesn't fit your precedents. More silence. More exchanged looks. Issei felt Draig's tension through the bond, felt her preparing for the worst. Then Vritra stood. The council will deliberate. You will wait. A gesture, and suddenly Issei and Draig were in a different chamber, smaller, more intimate, clearly a waiting area. Well, Issei said once they were alone, that was terrifying. Draig released a breath she'd apparently been holding. You did well, partner. Challenging them on their own assumptions was bold. Yeah, well, someone had to point out they were so focused on categories they were missing the actual dragon standing in front of them. Through the bond, he felt her gratitude and affection, warm and steady. They settled in to wait, either knowing how long deliberation might take. It ended up being 3 hours, though time felt strange in the pocket dimension, so it might have been longer or shorter in the mortal world. When they were summoned back, Issei's nerves had frayed to nothing. The council sat in formal arrangement, their expressions unreadable. We have reached a decision, Vritra announced. Draig Gotch, your existence is irregular. It violates no specific law, as no law exists to cover your circumstances. However, it does create precedent that concerns us. Issei held his breath. Therefore, the council rules as follows. You are recognized as a dragon under dragon law, with all rights and responsibilities that entails. Your bonding with Issei Hayato is legitimate and binding. However, you will submit to observation, quarterly check-ins with the council designee, monitoring of your power usage, and immediate reporting of any instability in your manifestation. I accept those terms, Draig said immediately. Furthermore, Vritra continued, should any other sacred gear consciousness attempt to replicate your transformation, you will assist the council in understanding how it occurred. We must ensure this remains an isolated incident. Understood. Finally, the color-shifting dragon added, you are hereby designated as a council observer for matters involving sacred gears. Your unique perspective may prove valuable. That was unexpected. A position of responsibility rather than just restrictions. I am honored, Draig said, and through the bond Issei felt her genuine surprise and relief. Do not make us regret this decision, the shadow dragon warned. We're extending trust based on your millennia of service. Don't betray it. I won't. Vritra stood, signaling the hearing's end. Then this matter is concluded. you may return to the mortal realm. Live well, Red Dragon Emperor. And you, Issei Hayadu, you chose an interesting destiny when you bonded with her. May it bring you both what you seek. The dismissal was clear. Moments later they stepped back through the portal into the mortal world, emerging in the forest clearing where they'd started. Draig immediately sat down on a fallen log, tension draining from her frame. That went better than I feared. Better than expected, honestly, Issei agreed, joining her. They actually gave you responsibilities. That's almost like respect. Don't push it, she said, but she was smiling. Still, yes. This is probably the best outcome we could have hoped for. Through the bond, Issei felt the complex mix of her emotions, relief, satisfaction, lingering anxiety, and beneath it all, that growing warmth whenever she focused on him. We should celebrate, he said impulsively. Proper celebration. Dinner somewhere nice, not my terrible cooking or takeout. Is this you asking me on a date, partner? The question hung in the air between them, suddenly loaded with implications neither had directly addressed. They were bonded, shared a home, knew each other more intimately than most couples ever would, but they hadn't discussed what that meant beyond partnership and friendship. Maybe? Issei said carefully. If you'd be interested in that? Draig's smile grew. I think I would be. Though I should warn you, I have millennia of observed human courtship rituals to compare you against. Great, no pressure then. She laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. Issei, you've already bonded your soul to mine for eternity. I think the pressure of a first date is manageable by comparison. Fair point. As they walked back toward civilization, hands not quite touching but close, Issei marveled at how his life had changed in less than a month. His sacred gear was gone, replaced by a living, breathing partner. His power now came through a bond rather than a divine construct. And somewhere along the way, his relationship with his partner had shifted into something that felt suspiciously like the beginning of romance. I can hear you thinking, Draig's mental voice teased. Privacy, remember? You're projecting emotions loudly enough that I'd need to be actively blocking not to notice. And what emotions am I projecting? A pause, then contentment. Anticipation. Affection. And a fair amount of nervousness about this date idea. That obvious, huh? To someone soul bonded to you? Yes. Another pause. For what it's worth, I'm projecting similar emotions. That admission made Issei's heart skip a beat. Through the bond, he felt her amusement at his reaction, followed by her own flutter of nervousness. They were really doing this. Moving from partners in battle to something more. Something neither had quite defined yet, but both were willing to explore. The council had given Draig permission to exist. Now they just had to figure out how to live, together, as they'd always done. But with the possibility of something deeper, something neither had expected when this transformation began. So, Draig said as Ko came into view. Where does one take a primordial dragon on a first date? I have absolutely no idea, Issei admitted. But I'll figure it out. I've faced down gods and survived. How hard can dating be? Draig's laughter echoed across the twilight, and through the bond, Issei felt her joy as clearly as his own. They'd figure it out. Together, just like everything else.